Alright, welcome to this video here. It's called Constitution Close Read. So you just read this and you probably have a lot of questions in your head, and so I always like to draw a little picture. This is a typical 9th grader, and that's but it looks a little bit sad. Maybe we should give you a bigger smile there. There we go. Okay, and eyeballs, yeah, not great. But basically, what this article does and what's happening right now in your head, you probably have a lot of things that you read that you feel like you did not know. All right, and here's your brain, and what's in your brain is background knowledge. Background knowledge. And when you read this, what the reading does is, if you don't have anything to connect what you're reading to, the result is, first of all, frustration. What is great is if you can turn your frustration into questions, because questions can be answered. Frustration, not so much. So what I want you to do right now is not on this page, because we're going to fill this page up, but I want you to pause the video, and I want you to, somewhere else, like over here, maybe I'll do it myself, on another page, on the back page, wherever, somewhere, I want you to write 5 questions. 5 questions that you have after reading this piece. So pause the video. And we're back. All right, well, let's see if your questions are answered by my timeline. All right, so we have here a timeline. Put this timeline at the very bottom. If you need to pause it to do so, that is just fine. We've got 1776, the founding of our nation. We have another date here, which is 1789. 1789. 1789 was when, let me double check my cheat sheet here. Mr. Sisson helped me with my dates. 1788. It's Constitution 1791. All right, 1788. 1788 was when we had a Constitution, right? So you know, or did you know? I don't know if you know. So when people talk about the Constitution, like this guy is talking about the Constitution, in fact, he says very early on, where does he say that? He says, good thing, let's see here, maintaining a, there it is right there. Maintaining a peaceful society based on the rule of law is hard, which is why our Constitution, all right, a peaceful society on the rule of law. So this comes from this right here. This is America. You're going to be offended, said my daughter. As a reader, as a writer, what Mr. Bronner has done is given us a hook, right? His whole piece is not about what 13-year-olds think, but this is the hook that brings the reader into the piece. You can find in this, he asks a couple of questions here. It's always good to ask questions. Good thing she's figured out that at 13. Can the rest of us? Can we figure out that people will be offended in our nation? Is kind of like how he brings us into his argument. And this, by the way, is an argument. And the reason that I really like it, and I wanted you to read it, is because it is a balanced argument. That is, he's talking about some pretty controversial issues, but his perspective doesn't seem to be heavily slanted in one way or the other. That is, he's not trying to sensationalize things. He's not complaining about things. His tone is balanced. He's trying to wrestle with some difficult issues and try to find the right way to think about some things, but he is not what you might see on your cable news every night when people talk about some of these controversial issues. So, back to the Constitution. 1788. Notice that our country was founded in 1776. So for 12 years, we had a system of government that was based on something called the Articles of Confederation. And it didn't really work so well. So the first thing very early in our nation's history is we went ahead and we fixed that as best we could. And our solution was the Constitution. And we had some people early on who were very, very, very concerned about the powers of the government and the powers of what the government might do. And any guess as to why those people would be so concerned about that? Well, they just went through the Revolutionary War. So we find ourselves in 1788, after the Constitution, they write something called the Bill of Rights. Bill of Rights. And the Bill of Rights tells us that everybody in this country, everyone in this country, has certain rights, and there are 10 of them. And the first one is this one. Congress shall make no law, and this is the words of the Constitution, make no law respecting religion. And this does not mean what you might think is like, wait a minute, we're supposed to respect, are we supposed, wait, the Bill of Rights says we can't respect religion? Respecting, in this sense, means basically about. Congress shall make no laws about religion or prohibit, and this is important for this argument that Mr. Bronner is making, or prohibit the free exercise thereof, or prohibit the free exercise, which means that our federal government, another thing that you might not know. So what I'm trying to do is help you read this the way that I read it. So background knowledge. So background knowledge that's helpful for understanding this is a background knowledge of the amendments to the Constitution, right? This particular piece talks about two of them, the first and the 14th, right? I also have to have an understanding of the relationship between the federal and state government, federal versus state. Because our Constitution says, because the people who wrote this were really, really smart. They said, listen, this power thing is really careful, and anything that's not in the Constitution and is not a power of the federal government, let's let the states decide. So there are certain things that we say, let the states decide. It's in the Constitution. The Constitution, by the way, if you don't know, is basically the rules for our country. The rules for governance in the United States at the federal level. Now, states also have state constitutions. So we've got a lot of different laws, federal versus state. You want to have an understanding of that because that is heavy in this argument, which I think I'll talk about a little bit right now that we've gotten to some of the ideas of the First Amendment. Okay, maintaining a peaceful society, Constitution, the First Amendment. First Amendment, which he has right here too. I didn't know that. I had to do it from memory. How'd I do? Congress shall make no laws respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Unfortunately, such clarity only solves so much because societies are complex organisms. It's not simple. And people can have different interpretations and not be wrong or right or wrong, but it's complex. People. This country values separating church and state, but has Judeo-Christian heritage, which means our country has a heritage and history that really links us closely with Christianity. But officially, there is no state religion. One that's fading, which is troubling to many people, but it still matters. So what's important to some is not important to others. Whoa. Imagine that. This is a democracy. Some things that are important to others are not important to everybody. Moreover, how do you balance the bedrock guarantees of the First Amendment with those of the 14th? And if you have no idea what the 14th Amendment means, well, he tells you right here, equal protection. But a little history of the 14th Amendment, and we'll see how messy I have to make this here. Hopefully it'll fit somewhere, is that right here, I'll just make it right here really big. What we had right here was the Civil War. let's just say it was right there. The 14th Amendment was passed in 65. Let me double check with my, it might have been later than that, maybe 67. 68. Was passed in 1868 as a result of the Civil War. So basically, when they try to put the country back together, they pass something that are called the Reconstruction Amendments to the Constitution, because the makers of our Constitution decided that they weren't done with it. There had to be a way to fix it and to improve it. And so our Constitution, while it was originally ratified in 1788, as late as 1868, and much later, it was still being changed by our lawmakers. Reconstruction Amendment. And this one particularly said people are treated equally. People must be treated equally. Okay, so now this lays out the conflict that he's talking about, which is so frequently, portrayed in the media as something that's like, people are on fire and one side is completely wrong and the other side is completely blind. When in reality, what it is it's an argument about which has more power. The First Amendment about the freedom of religion and the practice of religion, and this idea about equality. That's all it is. And so when we look at things like, and what does he mention? He mentions a couple of the things that are big issues that certainly get a lot of attention, like the woman who what's her name? Here it is, Kim Davis, who said, "It's against my religious beliefs for me to give marriage license to same-sex couples." Okay, which sounds like, well, yeah, that's right in line with, Congress not make a law Congress doesn't tell you what to do with your religion. But on the other hand, the 14th Amendment says people are treated equally. And in that case, she is an official of the government who is not treating people equally. So that is what the debate is. And these are the kinds of things that we hope that you build as throughout the year. That you are increasing your knowledge so that when you read another piece like this later, when you hear a debate, you can understand that these things are rooted in history and that our main tool for understanding history is logic and reason. And that it is possible to be, and this is what I liked about this piece of writing, is possible to be reasonable. As long as, and here he goes, so he's got his hook, and then the last line ties everything together. This is America, after all, and we have to be willing to be offended. So maybe if you're willing to be offended, then you can be reasonable. I don't know. I don't think that's quite his argument, but that's what I wanted you to. That's what I wanted to add to your understanding of this really nice little piece. What I think is a nice balanced perspective on some pretty controversial issues. So hopefully we answered some of the questions that you had. And if you have more questions, write them down.